Welcome to the CEO Project Podcast, where Jim Schleckser, author of the best-selling book, Great CEOs Are Lazy, and the founder of the CEO Project, provides ideas and tools to help CEOs of mid to large-sized companies grow and optimize their businesses. Now, let's get started with the show. Welcome, everybody, to the CEO Project Podcast. My name is Jim Schleckser. I am your host with the inimitable Sharon McGuire. Hey, Sharon.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
So we're going to do something special. We don't do this that often, but tariffs have been like way in the news. If you've been hiding under a rock, maybe you didn't see it, and implemented, then pulled back, and now there's negotiation. But the problem is it creates this highly uncertain environment. I've been talking to CEOs for the last week or two, and just, are we in, are we out? What do we do? What we don't do? And we thought we'd just have a conversation around tariffs. And as a business leader, what should you be thinking about? What moves might you want to make now and later? And hopefully you pick up a couple of ideas in this conversation. As we sit today, and we're recording this a couple days before it actually goes into market, but Trump implemented, so this is what he called reciprocal tariffs, and then very quickly rescinded it, maybe because of pressure, maybe because enough people came to the table and said, hey, let's work a deal out. But the idea was...
I don't know if it was rescinded, Jim, or just paused.
Fair comment. Yeah. Sharon's a lawyer in her other life. And I'm going to make sure I don't say anything wrong. So yeah, paused while negotiations occur for some number of countries. And the idea here was, I won't go into the meta of the political and the power dynamics that were being driven here. Let's just do the economic side for the minute, because I'm going to try not to make this political. That's the goal here.
Exactly. That doesn't help anybody right now.
No, and we don't do that really. The idea here was that there were certain countries that had tariffs on American products, and yet they were allowed to trade into our country relatively tariff-free. I found a couple of examples. Apples, which we're a big grower of apples, and Turkey has very low tariffs into our country, but yet apples into Turkey have a 60% tariff by the Turkish government. India, 50% tariff to protect their local apple growing. Right. Rice is another one. We grow lots and lots of rice. You think it's other countries, but we're a big exporter of rice. India has an 80% tax on rice. Malaysia has a 40% tax on rice from outside, from the US specifically. Mm-hmm. And then even cars going into Europe are subject to cars coming from Europe are subject to like a 2.5% tax. Cars going into like Germany are subject to a 10% tax. And so it wasn't symmetric. Whatever you think the politics are, you're like, well, that doesn't seem so fair. You get to protect your industry and we don't get to protect ours. And consequently, a couple of our industries have been hulked out over time.
And I think people are actually becoming more and more aware of the imbalances.
I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, it's all free trade everywhere. And whoop, not so fast, far cry.
Right.
And again, not political, but sometimes the policy is right, but the way we did it is wrong. So this may be in some cases that. And so now we're negotiating. So let's go down the path of nobody's going to settle anything and we're going to go back to tariffs at some level, which is what's got everybody freaked out, particularly people that have lots of imported goods as a raw material for whatever they do.
Exactly.
Steel, aluminum.
Chips, microchip, semiconductors.
I saw a stat that said that an Apple iPhone, it costs about $1,000 to make it, mostly in Asia. If we were to make that in the US, it would cost between $4,000 and $5,000. So yeah, big problem. Nobody wants to pay $5,000 for a phone. Although I don't know what the heck we do if this didn't get fixed. But the first move, and we've had a couple of members in the CEO Project that have already done this, they immediately took price up. And the way they did it, they said, all right, let's figure out what goods I use to make my product that are subject to tariffs. Let's figure how much that made my costs go up, right? And then I'm going to raise prices to cover it. And maybe even just a squeak more just because.
Jim, I have a question about that, because I was thinking about that as we were preparing for this podcast. I understand the increased cost due to raw material or products that you use in your product. However, don't most companies have contracts in place with tariff language?
No, not to my experience. And they'd argue we, as the manufacturer in fill in the blank, Malaysia, India, Turkey, China, we're not getting a nickel more. all of these dollars are going to your government, Mr. American or Mrs. American customer. And so this is when you hear Trump talking about, we're going to put in tariffs that are going to make us really wealthy. Effectively, a tariff is a tax. It's a VAT tax. So the value, except it's imported value tax effectively. So, and the problem is you can't recover it like you can a VAT. If I take it and then transform it, I can recover part of it. You can't do that. And so it's just a tax on all goods that goes to the government and fills their coffers.
Yeah.
I think he was actually thinking back to the era of McKinley, which is a long time ago. The U.S. government was entirely funded on tariffs, no income tax. So I think that when I hear his language, oh, we're going to get really rich, that's what he's thinking. And so the supplier goes, hey, man, I'm not getting a penny more. It's your government. You got a problem, talk to them. And I've never seen one that says if a tariff goes into place, we'll eat it as the manufacturer. I've never, boy, if you got that contract, you're in a happy place. But
I have seen contracts like that where it's more there's tariff language, and I think it's become more of a modern contract where if I'm getting my supply from XYZ country out of the United States, let's talk about who's going to bear the brunt of the tariff. And sometimes it's the supplier, 50%. Sometimes it's the customer, 50%. Tariff language is becoming more common in contracts.
It sure will now.
Right? Just like same as force majeure became very common in contracts as a result of COVID.
Yep. Good point. I do think you have to take price up because most people don't have that language. They may in the future, but then I'd be really hesitant to accept the language as a supplier. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that because who knows what craziness is going to happen. And I don't want to, that's all my profit gone.
Right.
So immediately move up prices. And people go, why would I have to do that? And I go, here's the problem. If you've got inventory and you don't raise prices, when you have to replace that inventory at higher prices, you're not going to have the cash to do it. So you can't wait for the inventory to clear and then raise prices. You have to do it now so you can replace the inventory, the raw materials, at the higher price. Yeah. It's just a cash thing. So I'm going to say, and this is not like, this is going to be inflationary, but raise prices right now. I had one guy I talked to this morning. He goes, he had an IT services company. It was doing like software and stuff for him. And they sent them an invoice that goes XYZ dollars plus 10% for tariff, new number. And he goes, what are you buying from anywhere? They had no excuse for it, but everybody people are going to use tariff as an excuse to increase prices. But I think if you can see it coming, you should just go ahead and get in front of it right now. A lot of people waited on price increases during COVID and then never were able to get back and get the price. So they permanently compressed their margins. So I think, so that's like short term, just to cover yourself. Figure out how much of your input changes and then up your prices. The other is, I think you really need to rethink your whole supply chain.
Absolutely.
And that might mean instead of buying from a very high tariff country, China, let's pick in the butt, maybe there's a more expensive provider from Japan with a significantly lower tariff. It ends up onshoring cheaper when you're done, or Malaysia or Korea or wherever, or Mexico, or, what Trump keeps saying, but I think this is a kind of a long cycle change, bring it back to the US.
But we can't wait for that right now. But
how long does it take to build a semiconductor factory or a steel factory? 5 years, 10, it's a long time. So,
it is.
Yeah. So I agree. I don't think you can wait for that. Maybe you can find some capacity somewhere in the US and sneak yourself in there. But I think going forward, you're going to have a blended strategy, like some offshore, super cheap, some nearer shore that maybe has got a little more security to the supply, but expensive, and maybe a little bit onshore. We've seen this with business process outsourcing firms. They go, we'll do part of our call center work in India or Philippines. We'll do part of it in Belize or Jamaica, and we'll do a little bit in like Kansas. Right. And that way we're protected for geopolitics. So
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it brings a little bit more competition in that supply chain.
I think that's the related thing. I would immediately start qualifying other suppliers for critical items.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was, again, talking to the CEO this morning, and they have a critical polymer material that they buy from France. And he had actually been working on qualifying a U.S. supplier just to give them a little diversity here. And they now fast tracked it. They're going to get that supplier qualified really quick. They're a little more expensive, but it'll do the job. And rather than face 20+% tariffs or whatever the number is going to be, he's covered, and he can keep the French supplier a little bit honest in the meanwhile.
Interesting.
So I think
move.
Qualifying another supplier for a couple of critical items. Now there's some, like you think about some of the chips that are in iPhones and made in Taiwan. There's not another fab that can. So I don't know what you do then. You're a little bamboozled at that point. Pray for rain. I don't know, but so those are the moves I'm thinking. Price, modify your supply chain strategy, qualify other vendors, and like right now, just as a protective measure. And by the way, the other thing that's going to happen is it's not just your direct suppliers that are going to probably move up. Your suppliers that are US based, but are buying input materials they're going to move up. And so don't skinny yourself here and just do a 1-for-1 calculation. Think about all of your suppliers that are probably influenced, because they're going to end up with that bump up in prices.
Yeah.
I think the other problem, so just think another step down. Who do tariffs affect the most? Wealthy people or people more working class?
It should affect everyone.
Not equally.
But not equally, of course.
It's regressive. Somebody who makes a big pile of money doesn't have to spend, they could choose not, they probably don't spend all their money for one. They sure don't, they can wait if they want to for a lot of goods. And a smaller percentage of their purchasing goes to things that have tariffs on them, if you will. As opposed to somebody who's paycheck to paycheck, they're like, I got to spend every nickel I got. And it's all for stuff that's affected. It's food from grapes from Chile and apples from Venezuela.
Or the car breaks down and you got to get to work. Now I got to buy a new car and I wasn't planning on it, but now the car prices are inflated to cover for tariffs. And there's going to be a run on cars. And it's just, and again, I think also with related to cars, the used car market is going to skyrocket as well.
You are so on point. So one of the things I do, like watches, and people are like, all of the Swiss watches are now going to be more expensive. So if somebody goes, I know what I'll do. I'll buy a used watch, and they go, not so fast.
No.
They're all going up too. Yeah, I think you're 100% right, Sharon, that you're not going to, I'll buy used because it's already inside the US and I'll duck the tariff. Everybody's going to jack those prices up because it's about
demand is higher.
And the replacement good is one that has a tariff on it. So
yeah.
Why wouldn't I charge more? Yeah, that's not going to save your bacon either. So anyway, it's highly regressive, which is to say a lot of the people that are probably working for you are now going to feel a huge amount of financial stress, which means your pressure for wage increases are going to be significant. You can't just ignore that, or people are going to freak out and get themselves in real financial trouble. I think follow the ripple in the next raise cycle, whenever that happens. We may have to be thinking about more significant increases in compensation to deal with the fact that people now have to pay tariffs.
Yeah, that is really a crucial thought process for the CEO, but there may be little workarounds for that. Where you bring back in benefits to people, and you talk about this often, that money doesn't always solve the problem to your employees. Like years ago, companies used to give you $50 gift cards to the local grocery store at Thanksgiving, so you could go buy your turkey and all the fixings. Those type of things may come back into play and be lower cost benefits to the CEO, but really help the employees out.
I think that's a great idea. I think it could take a lot of formats, but generically it's going to go up. But then I think your angles on, are there ways to make it go up that aren't quite as expensive? For example, I think that's
everybody up at the same level.
Yeah, I think that's a great move. So those are a couple thoughts. Let's go down the path of we go to full free trade with lots of countries. I don't know which ones, but lots. Okay. Maybe not China, because they seem to be the big bad guy right now, but bunches of others. EU, no tariffs on anything. South Korea, Japan, all the Middle East, no tariffs on anything. So what does that mean for us if we go down that path? What happens? I think it opens up suppliers you never would have thought of before. So before, it was too expensive to buy it from Brazil because of the tariffs that were on the products. All of a sudden you go, you know what? Maybe I need to think about a Brazilian supplier, because it just became more economic for me to go to that country than it was before, because now it's complete free trade. So that's one move. The other move is export. Now there were countries, let's say if I sold apples, I go, hey, Turkey used to have a 60% apple tariff and now it's zero. I can sell a heck of a lot more apples in Turkey if I wanted
Yeah.
to, or cars in Germany, for example. So going to zero, if that really ends up being where we end up, I'm taking the negative and the positive scenario. I think it opens up markets and it opens up suppliers that might be interesting to you. And that may be worth just stepping back for a second and going, where have we not entered because we were too expensive because of tariffs? Should we start laying some seeds? And on the other side, are there suppliers that we never really wanted to engage because it was too expensive to? Maybe we ought to go talk to them.
The supplier competition becomes a greater pool of companies and providers.
Yep. And interesting enough, it's actually a real problem for some countries because part of why they have high tariffs is to protect their home industry. So let's say rice in India, which is a big part of the diet, they want to maintain a domestic rice production, and they do that by protecting it. If they are fully dependent on other people to provide their rice, they're going to be much more vulnerable, interestingly enough. But there's a whole argument about if countries do a lot of trade with each other, they generally don't get in wars with each other either because we're too locked together. We can't do that. So it may actually help global peace at some level if that actually is an outcome of this darn thing. So those are a couple thoughts I had. I know we surveyed our member base a little bit. Did we get any sort of things that they're curious about or things that they've seen as they think about tariffing and what does it mean for their business?
Yeah, and I also did put a few surveys up on your LinkedIn page. Okay. Dr. Jim Schleckser. 47% of CEOs polled said that tariffs will increase pricing. It's obvious. It's a conversation we just had.
First thing we talked about. They already saw that one coming. Yep.
Interestingly enough, we also put a question up there talking about higher input pricing and what would higher input costs. And what is your strategy to cover the higher input costs? And 40% of CEOs that answered that question said they would absorb the cost.
I think that may be a reasonable short-term answer, but what if this is the new normal? You're eventually going to have to get, and that's why I think you got to go early, for the inventory replacement reason, and you don't know, you can always go down in price. You may not want to, but you can. It's harder to go up. And I wrote an article never waste a good crisis.
Here we are.
Exactly.
The other question we asked about it is if tariffs are affecting your current business operation.
Okay.
And only 27% of CEOs that responded said yes, somewhat.
Okay. Probably before the big announcements out of the White House happened, but
maybe that was on Tuesday.
On Tuesday, but Wednesday was different, and Thursday was different again.
Well, and that's what the business cycle we're living in right now. It's reactive like that.
Yeah, no doubt. I wonder if the 27% are ones that see opportunity if there were no tariffs. They say they are affecting my business, meaning I can't do business where I'd like to do business because of tariffs that exist here or there. If that changed, meaning full free trade, I would have opportunity. That 27% may have those opportunities possibly.
Expand their footprint of their products.
Like Switzerland, I was noticing they had a 35% tariff. Now, I don't know if that was a reciprocal tariff for things going in to Switzerland, but it was different than the rest of the EU, which was 10. And I suspect it's because Switzerland is protecting their home base of various industries. All of a sudden, Switzerland becomes available. It's not the biggest market, but it is a wealthy one, and there are products they would buy maybe.
Yeah. Not chocolate, but that's okay.
Chocolate and watches, forget it. But other things.
The other comment, which is actually something we've already discussed, was to find other more creative sources other than, let's say, so-called China for getting your supplies.
Yep. Interesting. Yeah, no doubt. I think the other thing that was interesting about this whole free trade thing, what I've heard in the press is they say zero tariffs and also no subsidies. So you can play the game of protecting a home base by let's say I'm protecting the Indian rice market, just picking on that one for no good reason. And I said, we don't have any tariffs, but we're going to subsidize our rice producers so their costs are cheaper than everybody else's, and therefore it never makes sense for anybody to import. So it's not only no tariffs, it's no subsidies. But here's those in glass houses shouldn't throw rocks. Corn, sugar, ethanol, all subsidized, as well as dairy.
In the United States.
100%, yes. So if we really go to no subsidies, it's going to have massive changes in our agricultural industry because they are highly subsidized, some of them in particular.
Yeah.
This is going to be a dynamic market for a long time, I think.
Jim, what are your thoughts about a CEO that has to either communicate with their board, communicate with their investors? I think those communities want to hear from the CEO. What are we doing? Where are we going? How are we protecting? Do we have a worst case scenario? Do we have a best case scenario?
Yeah. We've got one client that we work with out of Canada that basically imports everything they make out of China. So that conversation is going to be a really difficult conversation. Now, having said that, this is what's interesting about tariffs. Almost everybody they compete with also imports almost everything they make out of China.
True.
So they're going to go, ladies and gentlemen of the board, our prices are about to go up by something like 100% if this stays in place. I'm making that move like now, or I'll go halfway now and halfway if they stick, just to be proactive about it. But the beauty of it is because everybody we compete with has exactly the same backdrop that they're operating in. There is no relative competitive disadvantage here. They've got the same gig we do. Their input costs just went up 100% just like ours do. They have to respond in some way that makes sense. Now, they could choose to eat some of it for a while, but that's not an infinite game because eventually you run out of money and now you're out of business. So yeah, I think I'd be proactive just in listen to this podcast and take notes and be proactive on supply chain, on pricing, on thinking forward to say this may have implications about our compensation model, which is another reason why we're going to have to move our prices up. So it's not just the input material, it's our labor is going to get more expensive. But, and not to use the Biden, this is temporary, but if, let's say everything stays as it was, not as it is now with the on-hold thing, it'll be horrible for a little while. But then you go to a new normal where everybody is paid more, goods are all more expensive. That's it. It's a new homeostasis, but at a higher point. So it could happen. It's just super duper painful on the way across.
And I think that's what everybody that is in the marketplace is like, just how am I going to get from A to B if I know there's going to be this big step jump and I'm still making the same amount that I made in February that I'm going to make in July?
Then you got a giant problem on your hands.
Yeah.
If you don't pass it through. And I could see like price and then a tariff adder. It's almost like when you go to DC now and you go, or in a lot of major cities, there's a service fee added. Whether you put a tip in or not, there's a service fee. So there's a tariff fee on your invoice, like those IT guys tried to do with my friend that I talked to this morning. The other thing I was reading about is that one of the things that we forget, this is a little bit of a dated view of the universe, like it's all manufacturing. But if you look at a lot of the exported value of the United States, it's professional services. Like McKinsey and Bain and all, they go and they do work all over the planet, IBM. Right. And so it gets really hard to do business outside of the US when everybody is not so happy with your country at the moment. It may have a drag on professional services outside of the US.
Interesting.
Well, yeah. And I hadn't really thought about that, but that is a risk that's being created here. So it's not just products, it's services, and not the tariffing of services, but the implication for doing business. Hopefully this was helpful. Sharon and I just bang it around, trying to explore the issue of tariffs. And again, we don't know any more than you do about what's going to be true in a month and a week and a year. But those were a couple ideas, whether it goes up, down, stays in place, goes away. There are a few things to be thinking about. And I think even if we go to a no tariff scenario, some of the things about supply chain and qualifying other suppliers to protect yourself probably makes sense anyway. Maybe not the price thing. You may come back on your price at some point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us for this special edition.
Anybody wants to continue the conversation, we are holding a roundtable on Thursday, April 17th at 2 p.m. for CEOs to join us. And if you're interested in attending the roundtable, you can email me at Sharon McGuire at theceoproject.com.
To see you there. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time on the CEO Project Podcast. Thanks for listening to the CEO Project Podcast. We'll see you next time. Be sure to subscribe to get all the future episodes and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.